So I am very pleased to present to you today an overview of our newest report, Due Diligence in the Sierra Nevada Gold Country, New Tools to Remediate California's Abandoned Mines. This is a result of more than 15 years of work, research, and blood, sweat, and tears. The historic context, of course, is that before the gold rush, the state of California was very resilient. It had healthy rivers with fish loading them and running up to the Sierra, functional meadows holding water nice and high and cold, forests that were regularly burned by the people that tended this area to make them not only much safer in terms of fire safety, but also far more productive in things like nuts and patches of onions and healthy meadows. Then came the gold rush. Now, some people seem to think that the gold rush started off with, it was a guy and a burro and a pit, a pan, and the great state seal of the state of California memorializes this. I have a big arrow pointing to what I know is a miner's mercury flask on the great state seal of the state of California. But that's not the truth at all. Within less than a year, the whole process became industrial. A corporate era where large, heavily capitalized mines were opened, and they used very difficult techniques to extract the gold that they were looking for. They timbered, they cut all the trees down, essentially, most of the trees in the Sierra Nevada, to either build the towns or timber the mines of what became the hard rock mines in both the gold and silver strikes on either side of the Sierra. An early technique, hydraulic mining, required not only digging lots and lots of canals, but you had to build big dams to convey the water down to these hydraulic monitors that were used to power wash away rocks and trees and hillsides searching for gold. California had a unique geology. We had Mercury mines, Mercury on the coast of California. So in addition to these big, expansive hydraulic and hard rock gold mines, there are Mercury mines on the coast of California. Mercury was used to help in processing of gold. This left behind a lot of mines. When the price of gold fell, the miners essentially just walked away from their holes. This is the newest map from the Gavin Newsom administration. Thank you to Department of Conservation, Abandoned Mine Lands Unit, a sponsor of our workshop. And this shows you all of the dots. The red dots are owned by the federal government. The blue dots are owned by private individuals or companies. The yellow and green dots are state or local publicly owned mines. And these mines left behind not just holes, not just physical hazards, but dusty exposures. The rock where we live not only had a great deal of gold, but it also had things like arsenic and asbestos and lead and chromium. And those materials were hauled up out from underground, crushed, and treated with mercury and then later cyanide, leaving these large rocks around. We also left a huge amount of mercury, which methylates through the food chain and becomes dangerous when human beings consume that fish. So that's the problem we are trying to overcome with our Reclaiming the Sierra program. And we have three ways that we approach these problems. We look at the ecosystem issues of the forests, of the meadows, and we look for sources of mercury so that we can figure out how to remediate and abate those problems. We look at where these problems touch the humans and the environmental health of the human community through air quality, through dusty exposures, through fish. And we work to build the capacity of our region to fight for our forests, to fight for our rivers, and fight for our meadows. We've spent a lot of years doing research. We started off with our big report in 2008 about mining's toxic legacy, and people said, yeah, so what? Big mines everywhere, who cares? We said, well, people are recreating on these mines. We tested soil, we found some serious exposures. We tested the fish. We found exposures. People said, who cares? Nobody catches and eats that fish. Well, that's wrong. We've now talked to hundreds and hundreds of people who catch and consume the fish and take it home to their families. People have said, there's nothing you can do about mercury. It's up there. It's not naturally occurring. We don't know what to do. So we spent a bunch of years figuring out what are the ways to reduce headwater mercury source reduction, which are the headwater flow mercury down into the San Francisco Bay and Delta. We are the source, either our gold mines or the mercury mines on the coast are the source of the mercury that's contaminating the Great Delta, the San Francisco Bay, and the ocean. So what do we do next? Having a glitch. It's not moving. All right, here we go. We have been trying to figure out, despite the fact that we've shown that these mines are everywhere and people have agreed that there's toxic exposures and the fish is dangerous and we have to do something about all of this. Nothing has happened. Almost nothing has happened. We've been trying to figure out why, and we've begun to figure out what the obstacles are. One of them is just straight up ignorance, blindness to the size of the problem, the scope of the problem, and resistance to dealing with it. Everybody up here, it's our gold country legacy, and they want to think that that miner is their great-great-grandfather, and they don't want to think about the genocide and what happened, the destruction of the native communities and of what happened here. When they do think about it, they either think in a panic, it's awful, there's nothing we can do, it's terrible, or we're going to get sued if we even talk about it. The people that have been sued and realized that they have to do something, which is especially state and federal government, have begun to try to take action, but often these mines cross parcel lines, they cross jurisdictions. And in fact, there's sort of regulatory chaos about who's in charge of what, how toxic contaminants are moving across the landscape and who's responsible for that. So we think we've figured out the solution. We think we've cracked the logjam with our new report here, new tools to remediate California's abandoned mines. I want to point out that many of the abandoned mines are publicly owned. I showed you that map, and a lot of them are things like the Englebright Dam. It was built originally to restore mining on the hydraulic mining. The state parks has a number of hard rock mine and hydraulic mine parks. The federal government owns them. Even the poor little city of Nevada City owns them. But in many cases, these abandoned mines used to be a place where people worked. They were giant mines in the middle of towns, and towns grew up around them. Many of these towns are like the town of historic Jackson, California, built around the hard rock mine, the Argonaut hard rock mine, which was operated from the 1850s till about 1942. It became infamous in 1922 when 47 gold miners died after being trapped underground there after an explosion. The Argonaut mine, I'm now going to show my skill at all of this, and I'm going to take everybody out to flying over the Argonaut mine. We are now in on this shot in Jackson. Here's the downtown junior high school, Jackson Junior High School. This thing, I want you to go away, won't go away. This is the picture I showed you just a moment ago of this building. Let's fly out from there. This is downtown Jackson on the main drag. Here's an unusual structure, this item right here. That's a debris control dam that was built as part of the Argonaut mine. It's above Jackson Junior High School. Also above Jackson Junior High School and below that dam, above that dam is the old Argonaut mine site. Now, you'd think people would have figured out by the 1990s that you might be a little bit dangerous to locate schools and such around an abandoned mine, but no, Jackson doubled down on it. And here we go. This is what it looks like in Jackson today. I know it's spinning. Hopefully you're not all getting sick. I wish I could make this thing stop it, go away. But what I'm showing you here is the downstream nature of this. The high school, downslope, all around the mine tailings, downslope, down to the junior high, and then down what is essentially Jackson Creek, runs through downtown Jackson. Now I'm going to fly you over that one last little bit so you can see the slope of this. For some reason, it was seen to be a great idea to put the middle school, the elementary school, and the high school on top of and around the mine tailings. Now I'll show you what that looks like on a map of a seriously contaminated site. This is the Department of Toxic Substances Control map of the Argonaut Mine features. At the bottom, you see the Jackson Junior High. The top, you see the high school. In between, you see not one, but 4 debris control dams and a bunch of mine tailings areas. This seems like an inappropriate place to have put not 1, not 2, but 3 schools. Why does it keep happening? We think one reason it keeps happening is that people have not really focused on how to fix this problem. We have outlined 2 actions in our report to address this. The first is improve due diligence protocols on projects. Go out and look what you're doing before you acquire it or you do something on it. The second thing is we need public policy to force remediation, to force an increase of pace and scale of due diligence. When I brought this to my board, everyone said, no one knows what due diligence means, and no one knows what remediation needs. I'm not going to read this out loud to you, but remediation is about reversing environmental damage from mining, and due diligence is reasonable steps, not extraordinary, but reasonable steps to see what's on the property before you buy it. We think by improving due diligence on abandoned mine lands, we can have appropriate end uses identified. Remediation actions can be incentivized and pursued. Forests and meadows with abandoned mines can be remediated. Liability can be clarified. Tribal organizations can secure and restore important cultural resources, and we can conserve important landscapes. And why do we think this will work? Now we're going right into the theory of how the market works. People have been afraid to buy or even acknowledge these abandoned mines because they didn't understand what was going to happen. The liability was scary. So we believe if we can get people out and do a good job of assessing the property and really realistically identify what it will cost to remediate, how to remediate it, how to properly assess it, this will increase market confidence. Sometimes the right thing to do with a dusty patch of soil is to put a parking lot on it or build a structure there. It's not always a disaster. By clarifying liability, by clarifying assessment, we think we can increase public and private investment in these lands, in the communities that are so ravaged by these abandoned mine lands, and hopefully in this way increase the pace and scale of AML remediation. So we're saying this should happen prior to land acquisition. So if you're a land trust, or if you're a high school, or if you're a park, maybe you should go and look at that property prior to buying it and see if it's on a mine-scarred property, what physical and chemical hazards are there. We think that this should inform appraisal of the property. What does it cost to remediate? What does that mean? And this should help clarify the liability on the property so that if you're buying it, you know what you're buying. We have actually created a model that describes this relationship. And we say that the way to make this work, after having spent 15 years thinking about the best approaches, abandoned mine lands are complex, dangerous properties. They're not simple. A property owner trying to take on a big issue like this is hiring individual consultants who, and often I will say, and when you read our whole report, which we are going to be outlining for you over the next several weeks, you'll see that often people did not have the information they needed because they did not have good project advisors. They did not have people with expertise advising the project. So the first thing you need to do is get people to sit with you, work with you on these complex projects. The second thing is conduct informed assessment. Next Monday is all about informed assessment. You're going to be hearing from Dr. Monahan and from an environmental engineer, Alan Driscoll, talking from Forest Grin, talking about how to tie an appropriate evaluation of a property. How do you know what to test for? How do you know where to test? What does that actual assessment look like? And we're going to walk you through our own case studies on that and be as specific as possible. The week after that, we're going to go through how this should inform appraisal. If it's a beautiful property and it's going to cost you, it's maybe $1 million and it's going to cost $200,000 to remediate it, the appraisal should say it's worth $800,000. This step has not been taken. Many appraisals have been done using an assumption that there's no problem on the land. They don't know anything about it. And so they do not take the mine scars into the value appraisal. Also, that same week, 2 weeks from today, we will be talking about how this will inform liability, the difference between contaminated soil and contaminated water when it comes to liability, and how you might want to take these issues into consideration prior to acquisition and prior to project design. Finally, the last week, we're going to talk about how to include abandoned mine remediation into project design and permitting. Many times we've seen projects being permitted on top of abandoned mines without any environmental assessment of that landscape. So that's where we're heading over the next several weeks. We are hoping that you'll stick with us through all of these presentations so you'll understand what each of these terms means. What is informed assessment? What does informed appraisal look like? How does that inform acquisition?